Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marie Garcia, and I'm a social science analyst in the Office of the Director at the National Institute of Justice. On behalf of NIJ, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Learning from Doing, Evaluating the Effectiveness of the Second Chance Act Grant Program. Today's webinar supports Second Chance Act Month, and it is being hosted by the National Reentry Resource Center. Please note the webinar is being recorded and will be made available online at a later date. And just as a reminder, if you have any questions for the panelists throughout today's presentation, please be sure to put them in the chat or the Q&A box. I'd like to begin today by thanking our colleagues at the Bureau of Justice Assistance for inviting NIJ to participate in Second Chance Month. As the Research Development and Evaluation Agency of the Department of Justice, NIJ is committed to engaging in innovative research to support our understanding of reentry and to provide useful tools and knowledge to our practitioner colleagues throughout the U.S. We appreciate the opportunity to join you today during Second Chance Month and discuss our ongoing evaluations of the Second Chance Grant Program. As a quick reminder, you can track all Second Chance Month activities using the hashtags here on the screen and by going on to the National Reentry Resource Center website. So today, research teams from Georgia State University and NORC will provide insight into their evaluations of the Second Chance Act Grant Program. During today's first presentation, Drs. Bill Sable and Elizabeth Beck from Georgia State University will discuss their evaluation, which is mandated in Title V of the First Step Act. Broadly, their work will examine the effectiveness of grants used by the department to support offender reentry at the state, local, and tribal and federal levels. During today's second presentation, Dr. Carrie Markovitz from NORC and Dr. Andy Wigan from SPR will present on their longitudinal follow-up of an original cohort of participants in the Second Chance Act Grant Program. I'd like to thank Bill, Elizabeth, Carrie, and Andy for being here today and for sharing this important work with all of us and for participating in Second Chance Month. And again, if you have any questions for either research teams, please do pop them in the Q&A box and we'll be sure to get to them at the end of our presentation. So now I'd like to turn things over to Bill.
Thanks, Marie. So I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing at Georgia State on this evaluation of Second Chance Act grants. And the punchline is there's a lot in progress. And of course, in the last year and a half, like all of us, COVID has affected the grantees. So and their implementation. So this is really a lot about design and where things stand and not much about outcomes, but no real surprise there. So Marie touched upon the purpose of the Second Chance Act. I'm not going to review those again, but I did want to comment that in the reauthorization of the Second Chance Act, there were some changes from the original Second Chance Act that, in my view, broadened the scope of interest of the act. Retained with the first act is a focus on recidivism, but the act also has interest in other outcomes, more reintegrative outcomes like employment, housing, child support, and places a big emphasis on matching needs of persons who are incarcerated and soon be released with supervision strategies. So we've been doing a lot of work the past year and a half on evaluation design, and we're at the point now where we've completed evaluability assessments and working on site plans for 3 sites. One is in Alameda County, California. It's a site run by the Alameda County Probation Department. The second is the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council of Lucas County, Ohio. And third is Hope of Buffalo in Erie County, Pennsylvania. And just a little bit of background on the sites so you get a sense of the flavor of what they're trying to do and how they're similar and different. in working with the sites and talking with them and thinking about kind of what's the gist of what they're trying to aim. One thing that they have in common is an effort to try to build self-efficacy among persons who are involved in the programs. And they're doing it by different means. So essentially, they're trying to improve decision-making and how people respond to challenges upon release. And as I said, they're doing it by different means. In Alameda County, there's a focus on increasing knowledge and awareness of services and how to respond to those challenges using different technologies. In the Lucas County, the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, the focus is primarily on incarcerated parents and their families. And again, seeking to increase self-awareness and engagement. And Hope of Buffalo, the project in Erie County, has focused on identifying service gaps and using community-based supports and cognitive behavioral therapy to help clients learn to adjust to their environments. So everything is focused on trying to improve client decision-making, provide services, and improve well-being. I'm going to flip through some of these slides quickly because the main points are everybody's trying to deal with at least moderate, but moderate to high, quote, risk level persons, whether that's supervision levels or risk as determined by some risk instrument. Common risk instruments are COMPASS, LSIR, and other well-known instruments. Each program has pre and post-release components. Again, this is consistent with the Act. In Alameda County, they were the first county in California to do virtual in-facility case planning before release, first county in the state of California. But a big part of their work is pre-release work, the case planning, workbooks, and doing service referrals using an app that the Department of Justice has created. And a post-release component is to develop virtual reality simulations of settings or situations that persons might encounter upon release. In Criminal Justice Coordinating Council of Ohio, they have a curriculum that focuses on family and parenting issues and family engagement, couple communication and whatnot. And they also engage graduates from their program to work in post-release programs. In Erie, again, pre-release, they were trying to work in jail facilities, writing workbooks and some training and preparation for release, and then provide post-release services that focus on preparation for work using cognitive training and peer mentoring. One thing that's interesting about their peer mentoring is their peer mentors are former law enforcement or corrections staff, which is kind of interesting as opposed to formerly incarcerated persons. Okay. Briefly, all the sites have run into COVID problems and have had one or more delays. I'm not going to detail these. I presume the slides will be available, and if you're interested, you could read through those on your own. But we're at the point now where we've settled on a number of designs for outcome and impact evaluation. Luckily, and before we got involved in the Alameda County case, one component of their program was already being evaluated by University of California, Berkeley, using randomized controlled trial to look at pre-release case planning. And the findings from that was this virtual pre-release case planning improved first appearances on probation by like 11 or 12 percentage points. The county took that information to decide to implement this countywide. For the other three phases, we're planning to use randomized controlled trials for 2 of the 3. And for the third, we're going to do comparisons between a client group that gets the reentry workbooks with a group of persons who have been on probation prior to the introduction of the workbooks. So we're able to do a pre-post with matching to try to compare outcomes. In Lucas County Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, they're well along the way of enrolling people in the randomized control trial. Like the other sites, they're dealing with decrease in enrollments because of lockdowns in facilities that occurred during COVID, but slowly things are starting to pick up. And with the Hope of Buffalo site in Erie County, we're planning to do kind of a dosage response model with comparison, match comparison group person, other jail inmates who are similar risk and needs. We'll do process and implementation evaluation at the same time. This will be a combination of quantitative and qualitative analysis to understand core questions about timing, delivery of services, dosages of programs, and so on and so forth. And then we are focusing on cross-site issues. A core issue here is we want to be able to determine whether we can aggregate data across the sites, looking at comparable people who receive different types of interventions and make some broader inferences about the scope and impact of second chance grants. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Elizabeth Beck now, who's going to talk about two particular cross-site issues that we're focusing on collaboration and self-efficacy. Elizabeth?
Thank you so much, Bill. Thank you, Marie. Thank you, everybody who's joining us. And I am going to talk a little bit about two additional issues that we're looking at, and that are the issues of self-efficacy and collaboration. And as Bill mentioned, all of the interventions have a self-efficacy kind of component, but it's not necessarily identified as such. And I personally got really interested and vested in this idea of self-efficacy when I read an article in the Wake Forest Law Review by somebody named Charles Tarwater, who wrote the article when he was in prison. And what he says in that article is that learning skills in prison and getting GEDs in prison is a good thing, but the most important thing is to unlearn everything that you've been experiencing in terms of how to be a human and ways in which all decision making is taken away from you. So, which to me sounded like a portion of what he was talking about was self-efficacy. And so we began to look at, and we know that self-efficacy in smaller studies is associated with less recidivism, has good outcomes, but we don't have a larger way to look at it. And so we began to experiment or play with the idea of using the sites to do retrospective interviews with people on self-efficacy. And our goal is at each site is to do about 18 interviews, but that they'll represent people who have been out of prison 3 to 4 months, out of prison 8 or jail, out of prison or jail 8 or 9 months, or out of prison or jail 14 to 18 months. And we chose this interview idea with the notion that self-efficacy dips and can change. So when somebody first gets out, they feel empowered, and as they begin to interact with more structural barriers to housing, to jobs, to a variety of things, that self-efficacy begins to our hypothesis or thought is that it begins to wane. And how do we then create a model of self-efficacy in intervention that allows resilience during those non-efficacious experiences that all people experience when they get out of prison or jail, be they can't get a job, or they can't live with where they used to live because it's too close to where a felon is, or the variety of things that interact and affect people. So with the idea that self-efficacy is a really important protective factor and for resilience, we really wanted to create a design that would allow us to look at the relationship between self-efficacy and recidivism, and understand not only how we can measure it, but how can we begin to build it in ways that make change. Along with that, we also, during the site visits, noticed the ways in which formerly incarcerated people had or had not leadership roles. within the sites that we were visiting. And we became very interested in ways in which, because all of the sites require any kind of good reentry requires community involvement and collaboration. And so we were really interested as well in what makes strong community collaboration, what are the factors that support strong community collaboration, and what is the difference in programs where formerly incarcerated people are in leadership roles for collaboration and for decisions that are made. And so those are the cross-site issues that we're interested in exploring. Not sure if you wanted to add anything else. Okay, so I'm happy to answer any questions when the time comes. We did do pre-tests, and within those pre-tests, the idea of the dips in self-efficacy definitely played out. The issue of the stigma and barriers becomes very important over time, past in many cases when somebody's involved with a program. And then the burdens that people have when they leave prison, including medical bills and things that they've occurred from prison beyond the fines and fees that they have to pay as well, also affects self-efficacy. So those are the things we're looking at. So thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to back up. I've seen a couple of questions, and a few minutes I have remaining to try to address them. One question was about LA County. I don't know the geography of California that well, but LA is a little bit south of Alameda County. So in California, probation is organized at the county level, and this particular site that we're talking about is Alameda County's probation department. So people who get assigned to probation in that county will be possible subjects of the intervention. And then another question was about whether the programs are far enough along for RCTs. So interesting question for a number of reasons. One is, are the programs stable enough to be designed and tested, and what where are they in their statuses? My response to that is, we already know from the Alameda County that they can establish stable interventions, because the evaluation I alluded to about the pre-release video conferences was done even before we started work on this project. Alameda grant goes back to, I forget when they originally started, 2018, and they worked with University of Berkeley, to design that, test it, and maintain the random assignment throughout. Now, they were measuring early outcome or short-term outcomes, whether people made their first appearance within 48 hours, and not measuring longer-term outcomes like recidivism. But they've demonstrated they can maintain a stable intervention. And similarly, in the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council in Ohio and Lucas County, I think they've had a lot of experience running programs, and they've been able to maintain their intervention with stability through the COVID. I mean, they've dealt with the problem of lockdowns, but they've been able to maintain enrollments, and they're about halfway to reaching their target enrollment targets, and they've got about another year for their grant. And another point too on the recidivism outcomes and other outcomes, our intention is to measure at different periods, like shorter run, maybe a year, 18 months, and then continue to track folk longer term using administrative data to look at a variety at these outcomes like recidivism, employment, and what have you. So a lot to do. We still got a lot to go, but we're cautiously optimistic about the capacity of the sites to continue to maintain their interventions. And we're starting to receive data from the sites that we're beginning to analyze that'll help confirm or deny whether that assumption they can maintain stable interventions is true, and then move forward with that. And at this point, I'm going to turn this over to my virtual colleagues from NORC, and I believe, Carrie, that'll go to you. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Carrie Markovitz, and I am from NORC at the University of Chicago. I also have my colleague, Andrew Wigan, who is from Social Policy Research Associates. And we are presenting on a longitudinal study of the 2009 Second Chance Act Adult Demonstration Program participants. So in our presentation, we'll talk a little bit about ourselves, and then we're going to give you a little bit of background on the original evaluation that we did together. It was Social Policy Research Associates, NORC at the University of Chicago, and MDRC who did that together. And so that evaluation was done between 2010 and 2018, 2017, 2018. And now, currently, we're doing a follow-up, looking 8 or more years after individuals participated in the SCA programs, and looking at long-term outcomes longitudinally. So we are in the middle of that study. So we're going to talk a little bit about the study and the pilot that we've just completed, and then answer questions. So first, just a little bit of background. Again, I'm from NORC. We're an independent nonprofit research organization founded in 1941. We are affiliated with the University of Chicago, and we're nationally recognized in our expertise for research, evaluation, analysis, and data collection. We are partnering with Social Policy Research Associates, who we also partnered with on the previous study. And they are an evaluation, research, and technical assistance firm with 30 years of experience in evaluation. And they have extensive experience conducting evaluations focusing on justice system involved populations. So now I'm just going to hand things over to Andy so he can talk about our previous study.
Thank you, Carrie. And I'll echo what prior presenters have said. Thank you all for joining us and for letting us talk to you today about some of the things that we've been working on and continue to work on. I'm going to talk briefly about the original evaluation that we did, the evaluation of the 2009 Second Chance Act adult demonstration projects, tell you kind of how that study was set up, and give you a little bit about the findings from that study, and then I'll turn it back over to Carrie to talk about our follow-up to that evaluation. And I think actually, Carrie, I have control, so I can just advance the slides on my own. So, so the prior evaluation that we conducted was an implementation study and a random assignment impact study conducted between 2009, when we were originally funded for the study, and 2017. The focus of our study was to examine programs developed by 7 of the first round SCA Adult Demonstration Program grantees, funded with grants that were originally awarded in 2009. Our study participants were measured on a range of outcomes at both 18 months and 30 months following random assignment. Getting a little more into the evaluation methodology, we randomly assigned 966 individuals overall across the 7 programs. These individuals were all randomly assigned between December 2011 and March 2013, so a span of about 16 months for our intake, and were randomly assigned either to a program group or a control group. The program group members were able to participate in whatever individualized Second Chance Act services were available to them from the 7 grantees of the 7 programs. Control group members did not have access to Second Chance Act services, but they were able to receive other reentry services, whatever reentry services were otherwise available in their communities. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that could have had some implications for our findings and results that we saw. We conducted a follow-up survey at 18 months, so 18 months after random assignment, got a pretty good response rate to that, 82%. So that follow-up survey at 18 months, we also collected administrative data on employment and recidivism at 18 months and 30 months to assess study participant outcomes. So we had the survey at 18 months and administrative data at both 18 and 30 months. Talking a little bit about the findings, individuals in the program group had better long-term employment and earnings. In the second year after random assignment, the program group reported consistently higher employment rates than those in the control group. And towards the end of the observation period at 30 months, the program group earned approximately 83% more than the control group in quarterly earnings. In terms of recidivism, we didn't find similarly positive results in the 30 months following random assignment. Those in the program group were no less likely to be rearrested, reconvicted, or reincarcerated. So there really weren't any meaningful differences between the two groups on multiple different measures of recidivism. Similarly, the time to rearrest, to a first rearrest or time to reincarceration was no shorter for the program group, and there were no fewer total days incarcerated. That includes time both in prisons and jails. So overall, we didn't find positive impacts from program participation on recidivism. In fact, there were slightly greater total number of rearrests and reconvictions among the program group, though this quite possibly could be because the enhanced case management and oversight of those in the program group might have increased the likelihood of catching new offenses or identifying ways in which individuals recidivated. So some of the possible reasons we highlighted in our original report summarizing these findings, the service differential between the program and control groups was largest for employment-related assistance services and was more modest for other services. So there was about a 20 percentage point gap or so between program and control group members in the receipt of services related to employment, finding employment, retaining employment, those kinds of things. Whereas the gaps between program and control groups in receipt of other services wasn't as stark. There were still significant differences between them, as you might expect, since program group had access to all the second chance services, but the gaps were more on the range of 10 to 12 percentage point differences. And so perhaps the fact that the SCA programs really provided a substantial amount of employment-related assistance helps to explain why we saw positive impacts on employment and earnings and didn't see similar positive impacts on recidivism. Another important note is that control group members were often able to access similar services elsewhere. So while there were gaps between those in the program and control group in receipt of services, mostly across the board, there was still a fairly high percentage of folks within the control group who were able to access services and therefore potentially improve their overall outcomes in the months and years following random assignment. And then perhaps this goes without saying, but despite the best intentions, the SCA funds may not have been able to have been adequate to meet all of the many complex needs of those returning for incarceration. So the programs did what they could. They did the best they could with their funding, but obviously funding isn't infinite. And many of the folks returning to communities have a vast and long list of needs. And so participants identified as part of the survey a number of additional services they would have liked, including more of some of the services they actually received. And so it's quite possible that the funding just simply wasn't enough to cover all of the needs that these participants had. So with that as kind of a brief summary of our original evaluation, I'm going to turn it back over to Carrie to talk about the follow-up to that evaluation that we're conducting currently.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks so much. So as you can see, we had some findings from the previous study. Some were encouraging around employment. Others were possibly more disappointing, especially in terms of recidivism. So we are currently doing a follow-up to the SCA, the original to see if longer term outcomes, or to see if the outcomes continue longer term, or if we see possibly better outcomes in the longer term. So to examine the longer term impacts of the SCA program on this first generation of the adult demonstration grant participants, we, NORC and SPR together, are doing an additional data collection and analyzing both new survey data and administrative data on similar outcomes to the ones we did for the original study. So we are looking at recidivism, of course, for obvious reasons, and employment because of the encouraging findings. But we're also going back and looking at some of the other outcomes, such as in housing and in childcare and such, to see if there were, possibly outcomes, significant outcomes there. We're looking at 8 to 10 years from when participants were originally enrolled in the study. So we had some obvious concerns about being able to follow up, to find people, and to be able to convince them to participate in the study. Our research questions are, very similar to the ones we had previously, looking at eligible applicants to the program, whether the group that received the individualized SCA services and those who did not participate across the 7 SCA grant programs, did we see better long-term outcomes in recidivism, employment and earnings, and as I said, other outcomes, housing, family formation, benefits, substance abuse, et cetera, just as we did with the previous study. So again, we're utilizing a combination of primary survey data and existing administrative data from various state and federal agencies. We decided to go back and attempt to locate and survey as many of the original studies, 966 randomly assigned program and control group members as possible. We decided because this a study like this, this longitudinally, or that so much time has passed, we decided that it would be best for us to design the study in 2 phases. That the first phase would be like a pilot, where we would attempt to reach a small group of individuals to complete the survey instrument. Obviously, we would design our survey instrument and gain the necessary approvals from NIJ and our institutional review board. And then based on our findings in that pilot, we would then apply that to the full study, which would involve the follow-up survey and the collection of administrative data. We also included in the pilot first phase some initial outreach to to several entities to attempt or to learn what information we need, what forms we need, what processes we need to go through to obtain the necessary administrative data. So that was another component to the first phase. So, phase 1, as I said, we mapped out our initial design. We gained IRB and NIJ human subjects approvals. We developed and piloted evaluation tools, a survey and administrative data collection protocols and tools in this first phase. The survey we developed was shorter than the original survey. It's a 30-minute questionnaire that we piloted with 50 non-incarcerated cases. So as Andy said in his previous presentation, on the previous study, we found that several individuals who participated in the study were incarcerated at the time of surveying. So we also anticipate that will likely be the case for our follow-up study. And so we wanted to try to look at the locating difficulty for the 50 non-incarcerated cases. Also for the administrative data, letters were drafted and request documents. We, in some cases, were able to already establish MOUs and data sharing agreements. So we made quite a bit of progress there. We then documented and discussed our findings with NIJ. So, and I mentioned the survey data collection. We selected a random group of 50 evaluation participants and conducted pre-field locating. The pilot data collection took about 8 weeks. We did this from November to January. We sent early bird invitations. We were quite encouraged. Several respondents called in to complete the survey. We only allowed a 2-week period for that, where normally we'll have a longer period. And then we began outbound calls to respondents and to their contacts. And we sent text messages and emails, and also we conducted locating activities, which produced a lot of new contacts, which in some cases we were able to send additional letters, but given the 8-week period, we weren't able to do a lot of follow-up during at least the pilot period. And then for the administrative data collection, we developed tools to collect and monitor criminal justice system and employment-related administrative data from federal, state, and local public agencies. We investigated and communicated with public agencies to confirm or update information, and we began the request process for obtaining these data. We also obtained approvals for conducting interviews with incarcerated study sample members, which, as I said, will be critical given that so many are incarcerated at this point. So what we learned from the pilot study, we learned a few key things which have helped inform our current efforts. So right now we're just at the beginning stages of our full data collection. And what we learned from the pilot study, so first of all, over the 8 weeks, we only had a 20% response rate, which is quite low. But we also anticipate that with more time, we'll be able to locate and complete surveys with far more people. 8 of the 50 respondents did the early bird call-in, which was very encouraging. That's quite a high percentage. The pilot was not enough time, as I alluded to make the necessary repeated outreach that we need to make and attempts in order to survey individuals and find them. We weren't really able to fully follow up with newly found contact information and also kind of develop the necessary relationships. A lot of times we'll talk with relatives and friends, and it can take some time to gain their trust and understanding to be able to then help us locate people. The pilot survey did not include interviews with incarcerated respondents or in-person visits. We had not started that process during the pilot. It was only phone calls. So we anticipate that both including the incarcerated respondents and utilizing in-person visits will make a huge difference in the response rate. We also expect to be able to obtain the administrative data pilot was quite successful, and we expect to be able to obtain administrative data for most individuals in the evaluation. And if we are unable to obtain high response rates on the survey, we may rely more heavily on the administrative data for assessing some of the participant outcomes, depending on how it goes with the survey. So we're very excited to have this opportunity to be able to follow up with the first generation group from SCA. And we're looking forward in the future to be able to present on our findings from that study. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Carrie, and Andy, Bill, and Elizabeth for your presentations. So I wanted to move into the question and answer session, and I know our panelists have been answering some of your questions as they come through.
Seems as though Marie's phone died, which is never a good thing. So I'll jump in, and any of the other panelists feel free to join. I think what Marie was saying was that we were we've seen a few questions in the chat, and I know we've been trying to answer those as we've gone along. I haven't had a chance to look and see if all of the questions have been answered.
Thanks. Andy, can you hear me now?
We can hear you, Marie.
Great, thank you. I apologize, everyone. My phone died, and I apologize for that. So one of the questions that came through, which would, I think, be great to talk about, because I know both projects in the development and getting started. So Bill and Carrie, could you're doing and when you expect to have any interim or final findings for these evaluations?
Hi, this is Bill. Sure. So one of the elements of the mandate in the Second Chance Act is to provide a report within a year after enrollments in any of these projects. And one of our sites that's farthest along is the Hope Buffalo site in Erie, who's planning to finish up late 2022. And we started to get data from the site. So, and they've, so finish enrollments by 2022, we'll be able to have some short-term outcomes for that, say, September, October 2023, to meet that 365-day report. The other sites probably won't finish all of their enrollments until sometime in 2023. So our intention is to follow the law, produce the one-year report, and then sequence interim reports as longer time periods go by. The interim reports will just provide updates on outcomes over time, and then we'll start pulling things together as they go on. The other thing is with the self-efficacy work that Elizabeth talked about, we're planning to go in the field this summer, and hope to have something to report on from that first round of interviews and visits. I think through some of the comments, I know folks know there's a literature on self-efficacy, and we're hoping to contribute to that with the first round, and then with subsequent rounds, see if there's more to add to our understanding of how people respond, and to the extent that we're able to articulate how involvement in the programs or people in the programs or family and communities affect that, we'll be able to contribute to the literature in that way. So tentatively, we'd like to have a draft by the end of this year, early next year, on the self-efficacy work. But that's just the plan right now. Carrie, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
So we are doing data collection through 2022, and so we anticipate having a report for 2023, probably mid-year 2023, I believe, is our schedule.
Okay, great. So there was a question about the article that Elizabeth mentioned from the law review, and Bill provided that reference in the text. So if anyone is interested on that article, that particular reference, and perhaps the other references that come along with it, that particular answer is in the text, the Q&A box. We have a question about the Juvenile Second Chance Act participants, and I can take that particular question. So NIJ's focus on these two evaluations is primarily adults. So we're focusing only on adults. We have in the past conducted one evaluation of the Juvenile Second Chance Act programs. We haven't done anything since. We would absolutely support doing that work. we do, and at NIJ now we do, we are focusing on juveniles in the work that we're funding. So we're, hopefully in the future, we might be able to support additional work on the Juvenile Second Chance Act participants. We have another question about, oh my, where did it go? We have a specific question about how the department and BJA solicitations will change, or their site selections and how that will change. I believe Andy is adding something there. That's a great question. NIJ is not, we are running the evaluation and the science and the research behind the operation of the Second Chance Act program. So that question is probably best for our colleagues in OJP. So not to skirt that question, but NIJ really isn't able to answer that. But again, we're happy to support our colleagues in doing this evaluation research. We have another question about, very early on in the conversation, about any efforts either project is doing to educate the community and public about attitudes towards formerly incarcerated persons as they enter their community. Are they being accepted, and how is that impacting their lives as they return? So either Bill or Carrie, do you want to speak to that?
So one of the sites, the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council in Ohio and Toledo holds community events. Right now, the name of them is slipping my mind.
Going home to stay.
Going home to stay. Thanks, Elizabeth. And directly addresses that issue. I think all the projects are trying to work on these issues in different ways. For example, in Erie, they were trying to work on housing issues and deal with community responses to what we might call a halfway house, and work to provide some support in that way. But I would say the Lucas County, the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council example is an explicit one where they're really attempting to address those issues.
Okay, great. We have I think, Bill, to the program that you just mentioned, someone asked if you could please repeat the name of that program.
So it's called the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council of Lucas County, Ohio, and the actual the name of their program, they call it Building System Capacity and Testing Strategies to Improve Outcomes. I don't know. I mean, what was the name of the?
Going home to stay?
Going home to stay is the community group meetings within that program. That's one of the elements of the program. They call it Going Home to Stay, to work to address broader community responses to returning incarcerees.
And I will put in a plug for next week. NIJ is hosting a webinar on the impact of criminal records and expungement. And we will also be highlighting the NRRC's NICCC inventory, which is the database that has a lot of information on collateral consequences. So that might be informative also about how folks who are returning and what impacts, they face and challenges they face when they return. So that might be something that you might be interested in. There was a question, I think, to me about the evaluation that I mentioned about the juveniles. I will certainly provide a chat response here in just a second. Carrie, there is a question for you specifically on slide 31. And the question, which is, I think I'll read it. When looking at the rearrest numbers for those randomly assigned to the program, were the offenses that led to this rearrest the same as when they were first arrested, or did they differ? Is that something that you can speak to?
I don't, that's a great question. I don't know if I can answer that right at this moment. Andy, do you happen to know?
I'm not sure which slide was slide 31, so I need to be reoriented.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure that out too.
Um,
The findings on recidivism.
from the original evaluation.
Yes.
Okay, and Maria, I don't see the question. Could you repeat what the question was, and I might be able.
Sure. The question was, let me get there just a second. When looking at the rearrest numbers for those randomly assigned to the program, were the offenses that led to this rearrest the same as when they were first arrested, or did they differ? And the comment that follows, I know those who were in the program were no less likely to be arrested, but just wondering if the offense severity changed.
We looked at arrests by different offense type, and we categorized it: violent crime, property crime, drug crime, public order crime. And we didn't see any, really within the recidivism data, we didn't see much of any effects between program and control group at all. And so there were no differences in those different categories of crimes. So I would say we can't definitively answer that question, but the evidence we do have available suggests that there didn't seem to be a difference in the severity of the crimes that people were arrested for.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, and I just wanted to say, at Lisa, I'm going to send you my email address, and you can follow up with me because I'm having a bit of difficulty finding it on the website, given my laptop issues. So I will send you my email, and you can follow up with me. Let's see, do we have any other questions? We did have one comment very early on in the conversation about the use of social biology, using communities as ecosystems, and looking at, let's see, sensitivity training, emotional rapport. And Bill, if you wouldn't mind, can you speak to those more community based efforts that you and your team will be assessing? Because I know the statute requires assessing the impact of the programs on communities and just kind of doing a more community-based assessment. So can you talk just a bit about those requirements of the statute?
Sure. So part of the community-based approach is tied to Elizabeth's discussion of collaboration. And what we want to know first is like who are and who's involved, what roles they have, and both in program design, but more in program implementation. Are the programs bringing in and reaching out to different kinds of community groups? So that would get at the kind of the front end part of it. The statute does ask a really big question, like what is the impact of this on communities and community crime and all that? And that's a pretty difficult one to address, in part because, you know, these programs are comparatively small. For example, in Buffalo, you know, they're getting 20,000 people a year going through the jail, and they're working with about 300. So to sort of say, okay, can this small program affect an entire county? No. But one idea that we're trying to explore is kind of like with the geographic location data. We know where people return, or at least some address data. Can we identify certain areas where there might be concentrations? And then if there happen to be some in some areas, or the comparable areas that don't have as many participants, where we can at least try to get some comparisons. But bottom line on this, I think we'll have to focus on that more qualitatively to try to get some sense of, in talking with entities that are involved in collaboration, some sense of what this means for the community of people returning. What things like, are they aware of the program? Are they, does involvement in the program affect how they respond to people returning? Or are there any distinctions that are identifiable and measurable? So it's definitely a challenging part of this. And it's not something, this manner, it's not something that can easily be sort of put into a regression model. But I think through the qualitative work, the collaboration, even self-efficacy, we get some clues about how that might be working.
So we have another question that reads, as drug decriminalization and other sentencing reforms occur during intervals of longitudinal research, how are relative impacts of those reforms, the primary interventions, and other contextual factors differentiated?
So as long as those reforms affect both treatment and control group, theoretically they would, then you're really looking at the differences, right, between the groups. So having good, well-identified treatment control groups, that go through, quote, society and time in the same way, they might affect a treatment group's trajectory, but we're really interested in, is there a difference between treatment and control? So I think, and in that sense, we're not addressing the question of what's the impact of these reforms. We're asking, if these things occur, are there differential effects on the groups that we're measuring?
Yeah, I agree with Bill's answer that the randomization theoretically takes care of any changes, and that we're really looking at the difference between the treatment and the control group. So reforms might improve chances for the control group, but we're trying to see that the big difference is their participation in the treatment group's participation in the program. And that's what we're trying to measure.
Great, thank you both. So I believe most of the questions were either answered in chat, and except for those that I've actually read out loud here right now. So we don't have any further questions in the chat or in the Q&A. So I would like to thank, again, our colleagues at BJA and the NRRC for inviting us to be here with you today, especially Carrie, Andy, Elizabeth, and Bill for presenting. I am the scientist assigned to these two projects, and I'm incredibly excited about the future of the evaluations and the longitudinal impacts of second chance and what is happening to folks over time from a distance lens. So we're very interested and very excited about these two projects. Yes, this recording will be posted. We will make this presentation and the recording available at a later date. I believe it will be available on the NRRC website. And again, you can follow all of Second Chance Month activities using the hashtags that were presented earlier today and going on to the NRRC website. So again, I want to thank everyone for joining us today and for listening to our presentation. And we hope you have a great day and enjoy the rest of Second Chance Month.